Learning in progress.
I am an artist. I've been doing painting and drawing and sculpture for many years. Since I moved here to the country, I began doing sculpture in stone, which is outdoors. Began maybe in my early 20s when I was young, and I was born in Argentina, so my studies began there so many years ago. Began actually studying medicine in Cordoba, Argentina, but somehow, I became very, very interested in what happens like within me, and the way to explore that, my connection with kind of the inner world and then the outer world, led me to explore what it was like to make art in the sense of doing that exploration, what life is about, what the world is about, my connection to all of that. And art became like a wonderful medium for that exploration, and that's what I still believe I do today. There was a lot of resistance from my own family because it wasn't there and then like a very appropriate thing to do for a woman. Maybe that's why I began medicine, like a way to please my parents. But eventually I gave up medicine because I felt strong enough that I wanted to be an artist, and that was very important for me. I just fell in love with art, up to the point that being a medical student, I gave it up so I could, totally, completely live my life about art. Studied painting in Paris. I went to ateliers like André Lode and other places. In Edinburgh, Scotland, I went to do printing at the university and drawing. So altogether it was a wonderful experience for me. Paris was the center of the art world in those years. So the attraction to many, many artists from different origins, ethnic origins, and different backgrounds and different attitudes to life. It was like really the center of the world for that. And I enjoy being in that center. It was just a wonderful energy. Nobody will question if I was a man or a woman, young or old, French or foreign. It was beyond that, and I enjoyed that tremendously. But I began doing sculpture in the 80s, doing a very large glass environmental pieces in the city, in New York City. It was the beginning of the women's movement in America, mostly in New York. And that touched me very much because I could identify with the quest for freedom from that perspective. It was not just about being a woman artist, but being a woman in general. Could be what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a writer or a poet or a human being, doing what you want to do. So I didn't participate in a very direct way, but I supported it very much. And I think it was very, very important for the development of art at that time. Sky was the limit in terms of experimentation, in terms of being considered for what we are rather than belonging to fashions or to trends that were, the latest in the moment. And the tremendous support from the art community and that. Well, I think that was the major thing for me. To be independent, being a whole human being and person and artist with no question about it. Nothing was really an issue, about doing what we wanted to do. There was an organization called Experiments in Art and Technology, like EAT for short, and that allow artists to sort of cooperate or doing consultation with people from the technical community, scientific community as well. And out of that, I began doing environmental sculpture in glass, very large sheets of glass, panes of glass, tinted gray or bronze.
Architecturally scaled glass constructions of layers and layers of panes of tinted glass.
And probably I began doing that because glass has a quality of being transparent or translucent sometimes, like a way to get inside the work itself. Towards the end of my stay in New York, I went to India and other countries in Southeast Asia for a year. India, in the temples, all of the arts are together. The architecture and the sculpture, you cannot separate in the walls what is sculpture and what is architecture, what is a wall and what is art, as an expression which is three-dimensional. And then there you have the paintings, and you have poetry, and you have music, and you have dance. Everything comes together, alive in the temples. And this has been going on for thousands of years, and still today. And that touched me very deeply. And discovering that in that way, I also discovered the use of stone to sort of manifest many of the things I was talking about.
One of the things that seemed particularly to captivate her was a method of prayer that she observed among people of all kinds in India, common people, others, and that is they have a way of building up piles of stone. Now, this stone is not used as an architectural space. It's not like a temple that you enter, but it is a focus of prayer. And often they're constructed by monks, and inside each of these piles of stone, a monk will put something which you will never know. It may be a prayer, it may be a special object, it has something of great significance to that monk. So there is a mystery there, but you know that there is something sacred. And people use these piles of rocks, which are called chortens, by walking around them in a very ceremonial manner. And it is a way of communicating with the mystery, which is what religion and spirituality is all about.
Wonderful spiritual culture and people, very, very loving, open people, where poverty is not an issue. It's not about that you're happier if you have more money or more material possessions. And that really was quite a revelation for me, because coming from here, a culture where, consuming and having comforts that come from money is a central issue to the culture. It was extraordinary to discover that to be happy, to be fulfilled in life, we don't need that. We just need to be open in our hearts, to be understanding, to be loving, open to give and to receive, the care and what's in the world for us. And this is an extraordinary way of being in the world. So being exposed to a very different culture, like in India and then Indonesia as well, made me see from the outside what I was doing in here. And that motivated me to leave the city and look for a place in the country where the environment would be more attuned to this kind of newly discovery for me of my connection with what is spiritual in art. Here in the country, I could develop this way of working so consistent with my way of being. And I like this kind of harmony, which is all of a piece, you know, my life and my art, and that's what I'm doing here now. Major change was beginning to make sculpture in stone, using natural stones just exactly the way I find them, or buy them, or people give to me.
They are rocks. They haven't been carved. They haven't been organized in particularly familiar geometric patterns or anything of the sort. They're just sort of left in heaps. But the heaps themselves are not ordinary heaps. They're not like, you wouldn't feel that these were left by the glaciers. Obviously, somebody or something has allowed them to accumulate.
Raquel relates to stone in a different way. I mean, she allows it to be forever unformed. You probably noticed that the pieces never become geometric, and you could never give a kind of verbal description of them. They're so complex, and you're never quite certain, did a person do this, or did nature do this?
You see a bunch of rocks. It's not different than a bunch of lines in a drawing, or a bunch of marks, or brush strokes. It's in the context in which you see them. Because you can see colors, you know, just all over. Could be advertising, could be your clothing, the landscape, the flowers. We see colors everywhere. So when you see colors in a painting, you don't say this is a bunch of colors, what is doing there. You have to, you know, to see it in the context in which it belongs, in which it has sense and it makes sense. So what we will call a bunch of stones, really rocks, is for me a way of using what nature gives me in the sense of as they come, you know, from the earth. They're not refined or carved or transformed in any way which changed them in essence. What changed them is how I use them.
So basically what you have to do when you're there is that you first have to find the place in your own being that might be capable of listening to what something that normally doesn't speak has to say.
Raquel's work is a very interesting case in point because she's certainly a living artist who is creating work that is not representational with sometimes very new materials, sometimes very ancient materials. The tradition that she works from is so ancient, I think, that it has become new again because it's been rediscovered.
In the Himalaya, the stone shrine is a central part of mystical practice, and also it serves a certain kind of artistic function. And I think she's trying in some way to emulate that.
So it's not as if she's innovating something in new technology that never existed before, but I think she's returning to an old tradition that's become relevant to us all over again.
I do painting, drawing, and sculpture. But basically, all of these mediums, you know, different, or media, as you call them, are not that different from each other in the sense that they're vehicles or languages to communicate what is the basic message that we artists have. You know, so it doesn't matter whether it's doing through paper or canvas, glass or stone, whatever.
Experience with many of her paintings, which are certainly minimalist works. They're in the minimalist tradition in the sense that you look at them and on first sight there's nothing there, just a kind of gray wall. There's more information looking at the shingles than there is looking at some of her paintings, and yet she'll have 5 of them. And if you stay with them for a few minutes, very, very slowly, very, very slight differences in the surface start to appear. And in some of them, there are even texts that are embedded under the painting that you don't even see at first. You know what I mean? If you see a painting, I don't care what it is, from too far away, it's nothing. Obviously, if you go a certain distance, it's literally nothing. You come closer up and you say, oh yeah, that's this. Oh yeah, and then within a certain threshold, its actual power strikes you. Then if you get too close up, you're involved in too much detail. With Raquel's work, it's very mysterious what the actual proper distance is and what the actual... I found with these, that I took my glasses off, I wanted to look at them from 6 inches away, because it was like looking at the surface of a piece of granite or something, a stone. You were involved in very, very, very fine-grained images. Not images in the sense that, oh, this is a snake, this is an elephant, this is a whatnot, but the sense that there was continuously interesting shading and texture, no matter how small you got, no matter at what level you actually were looking at it.
And so, while the effect of her paintings isn't immediately poignant, on reflection and in contemplation and meditation with them, a kind of they have a subtle potency that somehow taps a very essential aspect of art, not the essential aspect of art, but an essential aspect of art.
Not mystical, real. It's very real. It's a kind of reality that is there, but sometimes we don't see it because we're in a rush, or we're in a hurry, or we want to do things instantly.
But what's actually going on that surface is this very tremendous amount of activity, an activity that seems to be of 2 different kinds. One is the activity of these strokes, of the drawing strokes that she's made, and the other is the consequence of the processing of going through the black water, or the inking process.
The fascinating process for me, because part of the drawings are made when they are dry, when the paper is dry, and I put them on the stables. So I use pastels and charcoal and powders, which are different blacks with different qualities. So I see what I'm doing is in the light. I have some control up to a point of what I'm doing there. And then at one point, I take them to a sort of black pool, which is in the other part of the studio, where I mix water with other black mediums and some adhesive like a glue. And then I submerge the paper there, which means that the paper goes from being in the light to being in the dark, from being dry to being wet, from working in a way that is visible to me to working in a way which is kind of invisible, because I don't quite know what is happening under the water when they are submerged.
They're beautiful all along the way. When she just makes those first marks on a piece of paper, they're beautiful. And then she layers upon those marks a wash of gray. That's beautiful. And then she adds to that a layer of graphite. That's beautiful in its own way. And very often when I see her work, I say to myself, I'd be so content with a piece just the way it is at the current moment. And she'll say, oh, it's not nearly done. And she works and works and develops layer after layer. And each time she does that, the piece resonates more. I mean, the depth that I was talking about regarding her inspiration is physically there in the works of art.
Each piece is not completely 100% finished the way I can say a painting is finished or a drawing. And I enjoy very, very much this possibility that the pieces will not be that 100% finished. So they can interact constantly with my own actions, intervening with them. Partly is deliberate and partly I am attentive to what is happening in each moment when I do the work, when I make the paintings. And listening to that and be aware of that moment-to-moment experience, something happens in the process of making them that make me change or pay attention to other colors or invent something that would be more suitable to convey what I want to convey.
She presents a piece to me as finished. They really do seem to be a culmination of this desire to make something so magical and so difficult to define, very real in terms of the experience that you find.
In general, I can speak for many artists, not only for myself. We begin doing what we have a need to do, urge, whatever you call that, with inspiration, could have many names, where we create. And we like to share what we do with other people, the viewers. And to do that, probably the best way is to have shows and exhibitions in galleries, spaces, museums, wherever there is opportunity to show. And sometimes, you sell your work in those situations. Sometimes people know about you and they come here and they buy the work. How you can, as an artist, preserving the integrity of the work and what you do, and also, survive and make a living in this world. And there are many answers, not one answer for that. One of them is to do something else to create the money that you need for survival. And there is no end to what you can do, For instance, in my own life, I have been teaching. I have been doing, taking people to museums to see the work and talk to them about what we see. Could have been, for instance, selling my work too, when it was appropriate in exhibitions of people coming to see my work. With the new technology, there will be other ways that artists can do to promote their work or sell it, or make it accessible to more people, or just find a way that doesn't compromise the art and brings the money we need for that.
Her work, which is extraordinarily sophisticated, is very true to herself. And she is, in fact, an extraordinarily deep, sensitive, and very wise person. And for that reason, one has to take her art very seriously.
And if you look at the different periods in her work, what they have in common is that they invite you to enter into the time of the gazing. They invite you, you don't want to just sort of glance at it and come away with an image.
Essential to Raquel's work is that we have to identify her source of inspiration. She's a woman who has lived such an interesting life. She's lived in different countries around the world. In addition to that, she has traveled. She's had a family. She's had a career. She's encountered all kinds of brilliant people, poets and people in the different art forms. And yet, The source of her inspiration, I really believe, is none of those aspects of her biography, but it resides very deep inside herself.
She is an extremely profound artist because she taps both the history of art and the true essence of spirituality, and is an expert in her field, and produces work that is extraordinarily mature and very deep and very provocative in its way.
Through looking at her work, we begin to explore our own deeper, darker inner selves and make contact with something which is sometimes very elusive and very mysterious, but often also a very rich source of joy and creativity.
I would like to say, please remain open to who you are, to the truth of your true nature, and be passionate about what you do and believe in what you do, because there is nothing more meaningful than to be aware and present to that. Being attuned to the rest of the world is your voice, is your inner soul, your inner world that you're going to communicate.